Amen. Amen. I hope you felt it. I hope you felt what I felt just then. The comfort of being a part of a body of believers singing praises to God together. I hope you heard. I hope you did take a moment just to stop and listen to the rest of you sing, because I did. At some point I just stopped and said, oh, this room is ready to give God His glory. And it's a wonderful thing to be a part of. A church. It's a wonderful thing to be a part of. We're doing our series called The Journey to the Cross, and we're taking some passages out of the last couple of days, the last day or two of Jesus' life. We're just asking the question, what did the cross mean? What is it that we're about to be celebrating when we celebrate Easter coming up next month? And to start us off here, I just want to say this. Have you noticed what it is about humor? Like, what are the things that just make you laugh, right? Very often, the things that make us laugh are things that you thought were going to be going as normal, and then something horribly wrong happens, right? And you go, I didn't see that coming, and you go, wow, that's amazing. That's like the last thing you expected to have happen happens, and you go, wow, that, and all you can do is just laugh. This weird air comes out of your mouth, and it's a weird mix of a yawn and a cough. I don't know what a laugh is, and you just go, oh yeah, that was funny. Okay, that's amazing, and that's where we get humor from. Very very often, our comedies and our jokes come from the fact that something terrible happened, and you get together with a group of guys or your friends, and you're like sharing these stories. You go, you won't believe what happened to me, and you make yourself the butt of your own joke, and you say, I was so dumb, this happened, and your friends all sit there and they look at you and go, how could anyone be that dumb? How could something like that happen to somebody? And they all start laughing at your expense. And you're like, yeah, I don't get it. Because that's just where it's weird. Something horribly wrong happened. And we're all laughing about it because that's what makes things funny. But very often, there are things that happen in our lives things go horribly wrong. And we don't sit at a table with our friends and just share it. We don't sit there and laugh about it. Sometimes the horribly wrong goes so tragically wrong that it's no longer funny. And not only are you not wanting to laugh about it, but you would do whatever you can to keep your friends from knowing about it. You go, I could go the rest of my life without hearing anyone talk about this ever again. And that spectrum of horribly wrong to where I can live through this and laugh about it and live to tell the story crosses over into the tragic or the so wrong that I go, I don't know if I can live through this. I don't know if I'm going to survive this one. And what we tend to do in those moments is just hide. We go, I don't know. I think this spells the end of it all. Today we're looking at a very famous story of a man named Peter. And it's the story where Peter's the butt of our jokes a lot. You read stories and you go, come on, Peter, how'd you fall into that one? You know what I mean? But then we get this one story that when it happened to Peter, he thought, oh no, this is the end. There's no recovering from this. If you have your Bibles, open up to Matthew chapter 26. We're going to read verses 69 through 75. And this is what it says. Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him. You were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. But he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Then he went out to the gateway where another servant girl was, and she said to the people, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. And he denied it again with an oath. I don't know the man. And after a little while, those standing there went up, and And after a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you're one of them. Your accent gives you away. Anybody else from the South and your accent gives you away? Yeah. How about that? And then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know the man. And immediately a rooster crowed. And then Peter remembered the word that Jesus had spoken. Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside, and he wept bitterly. How did Peter end up here? How did Peter get into this spot where he failed so spectacularly that the end result was, I'm going to go out of the city and I'm just going to weep bitterly. I'm going to just get by myself in a dark spot and I'm just going to weep. Peter failed a lot, right? If you read the Bible, you know the story. He failed a lot. And he was one of those guys that failed in ways that only Peter could fail because he put himself in these positions that no one else was dumb enough to put himself in, right? Like, for example, he walks on water, all right? They're on a boat, the storm comes crashing in, they're about to get capsized, they're about to sink, and then a ghost shows up walking on the water. Now, say what you will about ghosts, but in my experience, that's usually the worst thing that could happen, is a ghost showing up. And so... Okay, all right, good. All right. And so they start freaking out because like not only are they going to drown, but there's also ghosts there, and then it turns out to be Jesus. And Peter, being Peter, goes, well, if Jesus is out there, I might as well be out there. And Jesus goes, sure, that's a great idea. Come on. And he stands on the water. And then the wind starts blowing and it pushes the boat away from him, he said. And so he stops looking at Jesus, and he starts looking at the boat, and he starts to sink, and Jesus gets him back in the boat, and everyone's looking at Peter, and they're going, oh, Peter, where's your faith? You had it, you were on top of the water. You let it slip away. Everyone's looking at Peter. Jesus is looking at Peter going, Peter, you're the one with no faith here. And the question is why? Because he was the only one putting himself in that position. Everyone else stayed inside the boat. They practice this nice little quality of keeping your mouth shut so you don't have to put your money where your mouth is. Peter is always doing that. So how did Peter get into this place? I mean, Peter, he was almost rambunctious. He answered every question Jesus ever asked. He was not going to back down to anything, and it often made him look foolish. And you got to think the rest of the disciples are looking at him going, Peter, you know these are leading questions, right? Like there's a second question that Jesus is going to ask you that's going to make you look foolish, and he just didn't care. And he just made mistakes, and it was fine, and we all laugh at it or whatever. And then today, we get here, where Peter puts himself in a position where his failure is massive. Jesus is having the Passover meal with his disciples. We learned about that last week. And he tells them, he says, guys, there was a prophecy a long time ago that was written about tonight. And the prophecy goes like this: they will strike the shepherd, and the flock will scatter. And that's going to happen tonight. They're going to get me, and you're going to run for your lives. And Peter goes, no, never. That's not going to happen. I will die for you. Jesus, it's going to be you and me. We're going to turn the whole world upside down. We're going to be this 1-2 punch. It's going to be amazing to see. We're going to change everything, Jesus. Don't you dare say that. We're going to do this thing. And Jesus looks at him and he says, this very night before the rooster crows, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter's like, I'll have none of that. Even if everybody else turns away, even if everybody runs, even if my own friends leave, I will never bail on you. And so Jesus takes them to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he knows he's about to die. He keeps telling them he's going to die, and they don't believe him. And so that knowledge starts to weigh on him. His heart starts to ache, and the world starts to bear down on him, and he starts to sweat blood. And the Bible says he suffered from an agony, and just even to death he was suffering, right? And he goes, he says, guys, will you just pray with me? Will you pray with me? And he goes off to pray, and he prays for an hour straight, and he comes back, and he finds his disciples, including Peter, asleep. And Jesus is like, you keep talking about how you'll never fall away from me. You can't even keep yourself from falling asleep for me. And then Jesus says these words that I think frames the rest of the night perfectly. He says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And I think as we read through this story of Peter's event, Peter's night, I think this makes perfect sense of how the night goes. That Peter really was willing to do it all for Jesus. His spirit really was willing. You ever been there where you see someone do something like amazing and you're like, that's it. I'm going to do that too. And I'm going to change this. I'm going to turn over a new leaf and I'm going to change my whole life. I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to change the way I talk to my wife. I'm going to change the way I raise my kids. I'm going to do it all. It's going to be amazing. And it would be amazing. And you really do want to do it. But then you starting to get bogged down, and then little after little you get back in those well-worn trenches of your everyday life, and you go, wait, what happened? I thought I turned over a new leaf. I thought I was going to change everything. Your spirit was willing. Your spirit was willing. And Peter, when he says these great things that he's going to do for Jesus, he means them. His spirit is willing. And then Judas shows up. He's one of the 12, but he's the one that betrays Jesus. And he shows up with a herd of soldiers. And Peter is not about to back down now. He pulls out a sword and he starts swinging it all over the place. He's going up against trained soldiers. And we don't know what the fight looked like, but apparently he didn't touch a soul except for he got the ear off of this one kid. That's all he could touch. And Jesus screams at him to stop and put the sword away, and he heals the kid's ear. And Jesus gets cuffed and walked away, and the disciples scatter. It says, and the disciples deserted him and fled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest, and he entered and he sat down with the guards to see the outcome. Peter's now in enemy territory. They all ran away. The shepherd was struck and the flock scattered. And then Peter gets his senses and he follows back and he goes, I got to do something. And he walks right into the belly of the beast. And you're wondering, well, what is Peter's plan? Does he have his sword? Are these good intentions, or is he just trying to protect himself? What's going on here? Does he think if I play my cards just right, I can grab Jesus, we can escape to Samaria or to Egypt, and we'll live happily ever after over there, and we'll be done? Or what's his plan? And you just imagine he's like, okay, I just got to bide my time. A moment's going to show up, and he's like in there, and he's listening. You can see the shadows inside the window, and he's listening to what they're trying to say, what's going to happen in there. And then out of nowhere, he's so focused, and he hears this little voice and says, you were with him, weren't you? And no matter what led Peter to this point, at this moment, he was thinking only of himself. And in a series of questions, he goes from brushing the question off, no, I've never met the person, to swearing, hey, I hand on the Bible, I swear, I don't know that person. What are you talking about? Would I lie? Would I lie? Am I the kind of person that would lie? To calling out curses, swearing. It could be read that he could have been cursing Jesus himself. What do I care what they do with the person? They can rip his head off for all I care. I do not know the man. And at the sound of Peter's barking voice, a rooster crows. And his head is flooded with reality and realization. Oh, but the flesh is weak. His spirit really was willing, but his flesh really was weak. And he went outside and he wept bitterly. You know, if Peter wanted to go to the grave with Jesus, that was an awesome opportunity to do so. And instead, he walked out of the courtyard a failure. Now, here's what's interesting about this story. Peter denying Jesus is that it is told in all four Gospels. We call the Gospels Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are the the tellings of Jesus' life that we have in the Bible. There's four of them, and every time that one of these guys said, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to tell the story of Jesus and his life and his resurrection and all that sort of stuff, every single time they go, and what I have to put in there is that Peter denied knowing Christ. So few stories make it into the Bible 4 times. The list is, let's see here. The list is the triumphal entry where Jesus walks into Jerusalem and they're celebrating him as a king. Jesus feeds the 5,000, the crucifixion, and Peter's biggest failure. A failure that sent him reeling, by the way. A failure that sent him not just out of the city, but out of the ministry. He didn't just go outside and weep bitterly. He also went back to fishing. A failure that left him going, this is the end for me. And for some reason, the Bible really wants you and me to know this story. And something makes me think I'm not the only one in the room who can identify with Peter. You know, Peter's story with Jesus starts in an interesting way. It's this miraculous story where Jesus sends them back on the boat. They went all night long, no fish caught. They fished the entire night, nothing. And Jesus comes up and goes, well, why don't you just go out a little bit deeper and throw it again? And they're like, well, you know, you're a carpenter, so I might want to listen to you about fishing advice. But then he does, right? And they pull in this boat, and it's a miraculous catch. It could barely pull the nets in. And then Peter says these words. He says, get away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. That's how the relationship starts. And Jesus looks at him. He says, follow me, and I will make you a fisher of men. And then we get to this story. 3 years later, and Peter walks away from the ministry and picks the nets up again that he'd set down to follow Jesus. Why did he do it? Because Jesus finally convinced him. Finally convinced Peter that with all of his bragging and all of his loud mouthery and all of his, I'm going to do this whole thing and I'm going to be great and I'm going to be amazing, that Jesus finally convinced him that he was not good enough. He finally convinced Peter that those words he said the first time they met were actually true. You are a sinful man. You do fall short. Sure, your spirit's willing, but your flesh is weak. And the Bible wants you and me to hear it. Excuse me. Jesus taught these stories. They were called parables. And something that's always frustrated me as a person who reads the Bible is that when Jesus taught in parables, they were always binary. There was a faithful person who succeeded, and there was an unfaithful person who failed. And I always thought, why is that the way he's teaching here? Why not be in the middle somewhere? Because that's where I feel like I am, right? Like at the end of my life, they're going to be like, Garrett tried hard, he failed a lot, but God loved him, whatever. You know what I mean? I'm not out here, like there's the parable of the parable of the talents. The talents was an amount of money. And a guy gives one guy 5 talents, another guy 2 talents, another guy 1 talent. You know the story? And the 2 faithful people double their money. And the one unfaithful person does nothing. I'm sorry. And the man comes back and says, well done, good and faithful servant. You doubled your money. And then he comes to this other person and says, you're wicked because you didn't do anything with this. And I'm always going, well, what about the person who was faithful but then didn't double his money? That's what I want to hear about. I'm not some 5-talent guy going double or nothing out here, okay? I'm just me. You know what I mean? I'm a normal person. Why don't you teach those stories, Jesus? And then it hit me one day. The reason he didn't have to make up stories about people who tried hard and failed is because that's all he dealt with in the real world. Everyone he interacted with were people who tried hard and failed miserably. And the Bible wants you and me to know that. And there's a question that you need to be able to answer. There is a question that you need to know in your bones if you're going to live a long life as a Christian. You need to know the answer to this question. I should be able to wake you up in the middle of the night and say, what does God do with failures? And you should be able to answer off the top of your head. He gives them grace. That's what God does with failures. The spirit is willing. The flesh is weak. But God is gracious. You cannot get through a life as a Christian without knowing that that is true. Without knowing that every time we head out there and fail miserably and come crawling back, that Jesus is there going, follow me again. Follow me again. You have to know that. We have to know that. Now, there's a preacher who wrote a book of sermons that helped me think through these passages. And he wrote this. His name is Christopher J.H. Wright. And he said this: there's an awful paradox that has found its way into the church. In order to become a Christian, you have to admit that you're a failure. But in order to stay a Christian, you have to pretend that you're a success. That doesn't work for the life of the church. Thank you. That doesn't work for the life of a Christian. Sitting here and pretending like I have figured it all out. Pretending like I'm the only one that's never made a mess of my life. That does not work. And it is an awful paradox that has found its way into our lives. Jesus finds Peter again fishing. And again, they have an entire night where they catch nothing. And Jesus comes up in the morning and goes, well, why didn't you try fishing on the other side of the boat? Classic Jesus. He loves that joke. And and they go, it's the same water. Okay, whatever. And they throw it to the other side, and the same thing happens. Can't pull it up. Starts breaking the boat. The nets are ripping. And Peter goes, oh no, it's Jesus. And he jumps in the water and he swims to him and he has this conversation with Jesus. And Jesus is cooking breakfast on the shore, watching them not catch anything all night long. You gotta love him. And he's just like, I got breakfast. And then he takes Peter aside and he has this conversation with him. And 3 different times he goes, Peter, do you love me? And 3 different times he makes Peter say, yes, I love you. And then he says these words, the words he heard at the very beginning. Follow me. I don't care what you did. I know you made a mess of things. I know you broke things, and I know you failed me, and I know you were miserable, and I know the whole thing. I don't care. What I care about is the answer to this question. Are you going to continue to follow me? And the life of the Christian is to always say, yes, I will follow you today. And you get back on the path. You start following Jesus again. And here's what's cool about being a part of a church. Is that as you meet people, and as you hear their stories, and as you interact with them, you start hearing that other people have gone through what you're going through right now. And they turn into this sort of life raft for you. They turn into this thing that keeps you afloat when you can't swim for yourself. And you realize that person over there is living proof that God's not giving up on me right now. And someone else is a life raft for that person. And someone else is a living proof that that person is living proof that God's not giving up on you. And you're living proof that God's not giving up on someone else. And we're all, if you go around the room, if you go throughout Christian history, you go throughout the Bible, you go, oh, I've dealt with the same thing these people have gone through, and God didn't bail on them. He must not be bailing on me either. And what happens if you get enough of these life rafts connected together, get enough of us serving as living proof for other people, you get all these life rafts together in a big group, you know what you find? You find that you're in a church. That's what a church is. A group of people saying, yes, I'm going to follow Jesus today too. And you're going to do it, and you're going to do it. We're all going to do it. It's going to be great. Don't you dare sweat that, because I've been there, and you're going to make it through. Don't give up now. Because even though your flesh is weak, your God is gracious. Don't give up now. Because here's what's amazing. Did you know that Peter was right? That when Peter started talking about all the things he wanted to do for Jesus, he was actually right? That when he started going, Jesus, it's going to be you and me, and we're going to change the world, he was right? He said, we're going to be this 1-2 punch, it's going to be amazing, we're going to do the things the world's never seen before. Peter was right. And when he said, I'm going to go to my death with you, Jesus, Peter was right. He just thought he was wrong, that he thought it was going to be on his power. That he was going to do it without ever having to go to Jesus. That he could just power through and make it happen. I'm a man, I'm going to do this right way, and he can't. But when Jesus brought him back into the fold, and he said, I don't want you to fish. I want you to fish for men. And he did. The world changed because of the church that Peter started. The world changed because of the missions and the work that Jesus did through Peter. The world turned upside down when the church got established and started telling everyone about this gracious God that we have. And Peter went to his death for Jesus. He didn't do it on his own power. But he was right. That what Jesus and he were going to do together was going to be amazing. The question that we have to ask is, what are we willing to let Jesus do through us? What are we going to let Jesus do when we fail? Because the question is not, will we fail in our lives? The question is, what will we do when we fail? We already know what God will do. He shows us grace. The spirit is willing, the flesh is weak, but God is gracious. What we do when we fail is we get up and we follow Jesus with the knowledge that his grace is enough.